Um, Hello again, folks. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And our guest is Dr. Alan Singer. Dr. Alan Singer, tell us who you are.
I'm their friend, Alan Singer. I'm a professor at Hofstra University, and I'm a blogger, a writer on really been concentrating on issues of race and racism because of the Black Lives Matter movement and trying to be supportive.
And a longtime Media Watch contributor, for which we are greatly appreciative. And you are our main guest, and you've been a main guest because you're on top of a lot of the issues we cover all the time. And you've done a number of op-ed pieces and a number of commentaries on a number of websites, and that's another reason why we like to have you. The statues basically are the key issue right now, and it's all tied to the Black Lives Matter movement. And there are a number of things going on that we can get into, but let's deal with the statues as they are, as an issue that you're familiar with, and put it in a little perspective for us, because people think that these Confederate statues just exist in the South, and we know better from having dealt with this issue with you before, but give our new viewers a perspective.
Well, the statues are really symbols that kind of a shorthand version of history. So the way we present the statues to the public are statements about the history of the United States. And what we have
These are any statues.
Any statues.
Any iconic figures that have been put up, right?
Now, what we have in the United States is during the 1890s, during the era of Jim Crow segregation in the South, we had the creation of large numbers of statues that rewrote American history and argued that somehow the South was a lost cause and that it was really a noble cause of people that should be celebrated. But what they were celebrating was a United States based on slavery and racism. And this was endorsed by President Woodrow Wilson, who was a racist.
So the Daughters of the Confederacy were the driving force behind putting up these statues. You want to get into that a little teeny bit?
Well, again, what happens is that after Reconstruction, there's an attempt in the South as they try to disenfranchise African Americans and keep them impoverished. And really, 1877 is a compromise, and the Republican Party is allowed to rule the country, and the Democratic Party in the South is allowed to control the blacks. And that compromise, which then becomes Jim Crow and segregation, we now have the story of the Civil War, that it was a noble effort on both sides, and that the whites were fighting for good things. And so we have a complete rewriting of American history, and the statues represent that new rewriting, that somehow slavery was not bad, and segregation is not bad, and that's what we're looking at here. In the North, you also have similar racist institutions. One of the striking ones is the statue of Teddy Roosevelt in front of the Museum of Natural History. The Teddy Roosevelt statue, which is built in 1940, really proclaims the mission of the American Museum of Natural History, which at its roots was racist. And what the statue does is it shows Teddy Roosevelt leading Africans and Native Americans to civilization. So that was another example of a blatantly racist statue. Now
I just took another look at that, Alan, on the piece that you wrote, and I looked at a couple other good photos of that statue, and it's amazing how many times I've passed that and never noticed that realization of exactly what it meant. Yeah, Teddy's astride the horse, looking like a hero, with the Native American and the other person of color behind, following, led out of the darkness. And yes. And you're right. It's been sitting there forever, but it's amazing that you can't see the forest for the trees sometimes.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing that we've been talking about, and actually I've been commenting on a couple of websites these days, History News Network and a few others, because certain articles about this rewriting of history and who says what. People fail to realize or don't want to accept the fact that the Constitution as written was a white supremacist document.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that because of the compromises they made with the Southerners to not only protect, but condone slavery. You cannot count human beings as 3/5 of a human being if you didn't think they were inferior to you and if you didn't want to make them inferior to you. And that's written into the Constitution of the United States of America. And so the document on which the country was founded was a white supremacist document. Now, it had a lot of very nice, good things in it that would allow it to be amended so that people could fight to make the other good things come to fruition. But at its root, it was white supremacist. And the founding fathers, Alan, you'd correct me, at least 50%, if not more, owned slaves.
Or were involved in the transatlantic slave trade.
Correct.
Look, when you look at the Constitution, the word slavery is never used.
Not
It's
once.
always others. But where you have it clarified is when they do the Bill of Rights. You know, we always identify the Bill of Rights. The two most important ones are the one that freedom of speech, press, and then due process. But the purpose of the Second Amendment was to permit the arming of slave patrols in the South. So the slave patrol militias now you couldn't disarm them. And then the 9th and 10th Amendments, which establish federalism, where powers are reserved to the states. Well, that's done since slavery is not discussed in the original Constitution. What they're saying is control over the enslaved Africans, control over blacks in the United States is a power reserved to the states, and it protects the right of the South to maintain the bondage of human beings.
Yeah.
Well, that's why states' rights was instituted. It was the new name for segregation, states' rights. Am I correct?
Yes,
That's
under federalism,
euphemism.
it was a euphemism, yes, for control of the African population.
But folks don't want to hear that when they talk about states' rights. They want to say it was about tariffs. It was about a right to make sure we didn't get taxed across state lines. It was about all, but the one main state right that they were fighting for was the right to control the bodies and the lives of those Africans, which was, they fully admitted in all their documents, the basis of their wealth. That's what their wealth was based on. Not just the labor of those enslaved Africans, but the actual bodies of those enslaved Africans.
Look, when Great Britain ends slavery in the Caribbean, they give compensation to the slaveholders. They are paid for their property so they could free them. When Haiti successfully rebelled against slavery, in order to re-enter the global economic system, Haiti had to pay France reparations for stealing French property. And what was the property they stole themselves? Even during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln offered the South a compromise. This is December 1862, where he said, if they end the war, he will give them compensated emancipation. He will pay the slave holders for their property. Even in New York, excuse me, in New York State, they have gradual manumission. Starts in 1799, extends to 1827. Why gradual manumission? This was not to benefit the Africans. This was so they could be forced to work for 20 years to pay off their value. People would be freed if they're working for nothing. And the Africans themselves were never compensated in any of these deals.
The clip that we played in the last media watch actually talked about the fact of how much service these enslaved Africans and their children had to actually provide the master that had been supposedly stripped of his property. And I can't remember Cheryl Wilson's quote, but a son had to give X number of years of service, and so-and-so had to give X number of service. But her punchline basically was, the last slave didn't get freed in New York until 1849. Supposedly they were going to be freed by 1827. The last slave didn't get freed till 1849. But the statues, which basically in the South and parts of the North were basically a revision of the history. Big fight going on. Big fight because of the fact that people in the South still want to hold on to those iconic, heroic traitors. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was it testified before Congress? Was it Mike Milley, general who was just before Congress last week, who finally flat out said, these people were traitors to our country. There is no sound reason for us to be naming bases, federal military bases, after these traitors. And we're going to make sure we take a long, hard look at any of our facilities that are named for any Confederate generals or Confederate figures of any kind. That's from our current military chief. So
in Brooklyn, at Fort Hamilton, there are two streets. One is named after Robert E. Lee, and the other is named after Stonewall Jackson.
And that's right here in New York.
And they're both near they're both near Fort Hamilton, near the Verrazano.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying that's left over from their military background, because Fort Hamilton is right down there. And because that's a federal military post, the adjacent streets then get named, their boulevards get named for these, quote, military figures. But those were traitors. I don't care whether they were military figures or not, those were traitors to the country. None of those streets should still have their names, and we need to start a drive to strip those streets of those names.
But I just saw a photo, must have been a drone photo of Monument Avenue in Richmond. The Robert E. Lee statue sort of anchors it at one end. But all the way down the street used to be Confederate generals, statues of Confederate war heroes. And in this drone photo, they're gone. It's, they've been pulling them off step by step. And the only reason Robert E. Lee is still there is because it's state land. The city can't touch it for the moment.
So Alan, speaking of those kinds of dichotomies with state lands, federal lands, city land, where the people, because a lot of these city mayors now are Black, and their city council, if not all Black, 50%, have enough Black members to try to pass bills to get rid of the statues. What's your take on, say, let's say a statue like Robert E. Lee? Because, I mean, I'd love to see them all gone per se, but there's been an argument that if you don't want to battle to take down these things, why don't we have, the sites are usually large enough to hold a second statue. Why is there not some corresponding figure from the Native American history or the African American history to tell the story of the indigenous or the enslaved people who had to fight out of this white supremacist thing as a counterbalancing narrative, so that you put these Confederate people in perspective about their phony lost cause and put their fake history to bed once and for all with the correct history right next to them. So you have another heroic figure that can represent the true history. What's your take on, I've heard an argument like that.
Well, that's been raised about the statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, because Washington and Jefferson are celebrated for their participation in the American Revolution, creation of the new nation. However, we also know that these were deeply flawed people who abused African Americans, who they claimed to own. Jefferson had a sexual relationship with a young woman who was, I believe, 25 years his junior, starting when she was 15.
Sally Hemings.
Yeah, who he never freed, and she remained slave, and their children were not free till after he died. So,
And he didn't free any of his other slaves.
So it's been proposed that at the Jefferson statues that honor him for his achievements also have to have markers or some kind of response. And I support that idea very much. I don't see tearing down the Washington Monument, but I think there needs to be a statement there that there's complexity about his background. One of the problems with taking down statues in some of the cities, for example, Alabama has a law that municipalities cannot take down statues without the consent of the state government.
That's a state law, and states are complicit in this craziness.
One of the weirdest things, New York City finally took down the statue of James Marion Sims in Central Park, because James Marion Sims had created medical atrocities on enslaved African women.
The gynecologist, the father of gynecology is his great title, the father of modern gynecology. And how did he get that title, Alan? Tell our folks.
He was experimenting on enslaved African women who had no ability to give consent, without any sort of antiseptic, without any sort of
no morphine, no anesthesia. They were just getting botched to death, feeling all this pain all the time.
And some of the experiments repeatedly on the same woman. Now, in Montgomery, Alabama, where he did the experiments, his statue is still in front of the state capitol building. Because Montgomery can't take the statue down without the approval of the state of Alabama. And that's a bad. There are a couple of good things that are happening now, and it's important to say.
Okay, one of the key ones I want you to set up, because we talked about this guy before. You mentioned him earlier, Woodrow Wilson. Okay, so one of the key ones, the new ones, and I really want to deal with it because our former First Lady got into the tiff with our current occupant of the White House. Lead off with that Woodrow Wilson thing.
Well, Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton University and the governor of New Jersey. But he was actually a Virginian, and he was a historian who championed the idea of the lost cause, that the Confederate cause was noble.
You're being kind. He was a racist.
He was a serious racist. While he was president, he instituted segregation in Washington, D.C. He showed the movie Birth of the Nation in the White House. So,
which also instituted the growth of the new Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
The founder
celebrated it.
Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain started in the 20s. It is completed in the 1950s and 60s as a response to the civil rights movement. It was a challenge to the civil rights movement.
But that's when most of these monuments go up, when there is something involving race relations. That's when they put up these monuments.
Yeah, the pushback. What was
it? Taking his name, Wilson's name, off of their schools because
how did that become a tiff between Michelle Obama and Donald Trump? Ray, you got it
already is. It's already a tiff. I don't know if it's going to escalate, but Mrs. Obama had tweeted that she was, quote, heartened to see my alma mater make this change, and even prouder of the students who've been advocating for this kind of change on campus for years. Let's keep finding ways to be more inclusive to all students at Princeton and every school across the country. Our illustrious leader-in-chief replied.
Not ours. That may be yours, but not
mine. Yours. I say ours. I'm talking. Listen, I have nothing.
Don't even go that way with our.
You've never even heard me say his name. But okay. The guy who's in the White House.
There we go. That's better.
Who's in the White House tweeted back, Can anyone believe the Princeton just dropped the name of Woodrow Wilson for their highly respected center? Now the do-nothing Democrats want to take off the name John Wayne from an airport. Incredibly stupid. Well, John Wayne Airport out in California.
Yeah, I know, and I think they should.
Yeah, well, you know.
Who knew they had an airport? Okay, but two good things else that are going on right now I'm involved with. In Brooklyn, there was a building, 227 Dewfield, which is by Metro Tech Center. It was the home of the abolitionists in the 1850s. Developers have been trying to rip it down for about 15 years. And among the people who have been led to fight to get it preserved is Letitia James, who's now the state attorney general. She was the local councilman at the time. Now, what happens is that activists have been pushing to have it landmarked so the developer can't tear it down, but activists want it to be restored to the 1850s image and become a museum of African heritage and a struggle against slavery in Brooklyn.
A marker for the abolitionist movement, yeah.
And what happened, it's the last building in that area that remains from that period. And what happened is the Landmark Commission met yesterday and gave a very positive response. We think that building will be landmarked, which will then create an avenue to have it turned into a museum.
Well,
Now, which building are you talking about? Are you talking about
227 Dewfield? It's on Abolitionist Plaza Place.
Right. I know exactly which it. There are preserved buildings on that block. I'm very familiar with it because I live in the neighborhood, and it's Duffield, by the way. And I'm impressed over the years that they've been able to save these, because you see Metro Tech grew up around it, and it took a lot of older activists to save it, and to know that they're after it again. You know, it blows me away that money keeps talking like that to erase our history.
Now, the other one that I've been involved with, a group in the Bronx has picked up the issue of James Mullally Park. Now, this is a park on Jerome Avenue and about 165th Street, right near Yankee Stadium. And the park was named after Mullally because he was the founder of the Bronx Park system. During the Civil War in 1863, Mullally is one of the instigators of the draft riots, calling on people to riot and attack blacks. He was indicted for this, though the indictment was dropped, A, because he had ties with the Tweed Ring, and B, because they wanted to ease tension down during the Civil War once the rioting had abated.
Tell people who the Tweed Ring was. Isn't that the precursor to Tammany Hall?
Yes.
Okay, that's the corrupt city hall politicians. Okay, we gotta put it in context.
Mullally's job, he would buy up properties in the Bronx from unsuspecting landholders, because he then knew it would be resold by the Tweed Ring to City Hall at escalated prices. So this man may have founded the Bronx system, but he did it through fraud. And he was indicted for inciting riots against the United States government, against the draft, and against the local black population.
Oh yeah, his name's got to go. Okay, another one to go put him on the list too. He's got to go. He's gone, long gone, but his name's got to go. How much time?
We have about 3.5 minutes.
So a group in the Bronx has picked that one up. So there are the Black Lives Matter movement and the execution of George Floyd has really become a symbol that for people that wrongs must be righted.
Absolutely.
And I think one of that is to rewrite history, take down statues, rename places so it reflects the actual history of the United States.
So we've got a problem right now though, because as Ray was mentioning it, a lot of the statues went up because the revisionist people wanted to push back at the gains that blacks were making after Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, they tried to negate them. During the Civil Rights Movement, you say Stone Mountain got built. So we're already beginning to see pushbacks happening on this current push for righting these wrongs. Bob, did you isolate some of the already, like the thing about the statue on Frederick Douglass that was vandalized, or what are some of the already pushbacks scenarios that we're beginning to see?
Yeah, we're seeing it. I mean, up in Rochester, New York, which is where Frederick Douglass spent a good piece of his life, and he's still buried there, I believe.
Yes.
There were a number of memorials to him, and on the day, I guess it was on the 4th of July, anniversary of a famous speech that he made, that his statue in Rochester was uprooted and thrown down an embankment into a local river, a la a number of other statues we've seen. So the fact that it was thrown into a river was a definite statement of pushback of whoever wanted to make it. They'll have to do another statue, but yeah, and we've seen it in Brooklyn. We've seen some pushback to the protests by people.
Didn't somebody try to vandalize the Black Lives Matter paintings on the street in front of Trump Tower?
Yes.
Somebody tried to vandalize that.
Yes.
There were some folks in California that were trying to paint over the Black Lives Matter that was officially painted with the imprimatur of the city government. I think they charged those people with some kind of vandalism.
And I think there was a music star or a radio star who defaced a Black Lives Matter signage on the West Coast, and he was outed right away.
Anybody we know that we want to know that folks can boycott his music?
Well, they've done it already, basically. He wasn't that big, but he ain't going to get much bigger.
He's already, he's hit his peak.
Yes.
So
and we have about 40 seconds.
So, real quick, or is it time to wrap it up?
We have about 30 seconds.
Well, in 30 seconds, all I can say is, Alan, it's been good having you. This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
You have to come back, Alan.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you very much.
I talked to you about the lost cause. I never heard about that until today.
Yeah.
I always get educated listening to Alan, especially what he said about President Wilson. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Look,